for the students who are in the room. I can see you out there. I wonder how you're feeling about your future right now. You perhaps are hearing these predictions that you're heading into uncertain times. You may be heading into a career field that hasn't yet been invented. Rapid change is ahead of you. You may be job hopping every couple of years or inventing whole new fields of study. I wonder if you ever feel just a little bit untethered. Where are we going? And this image has me thinking a little bit about the space program, about NASA, for a couple of reasons. This has been a big week for those who are interested in space exploration. We had an astronaut come back from a full year in space, so there's all kinds of interest in what's happened to him physically, emotionally, mentally, all of those things as he's been off the planet for a while. It was also Oscar week. So anyone see the film The Martian? Oh yes, okay. Another space movie there. One real life, one make-believe. So The Martian, if you haven't seen it, Matt Damon heads off trip to Mars with a NASA team. Unfortunately, he's left behind. Ship leaves without him, and he has to kind of MacGyver his way through one challenge after another, surviving by sheer will and wits and using the most limited resources and the most hostile conditions to try to survive and get home again. So, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it yet, he does get home, but he doesn't win the Oscar. So, no problem there. But it has me thinking about this motto of NASA that most of us have heard over the years. Failure is not an option. Sounds very uplifting. It certainly saved the Martian's life. He just persisted and kept going until he found his way home. But I can't resist editing it a little bit as I think about failure in the context of teaching and learning. And really, I think failure is not optional. I think we need to think about it in those terms. So what does this all mean? First of all, I'm going to make a little bit of excuse for editing the NASA motto by explaining that others have edited it before. And in fact, this was the original long version, and it took another Hollywood screenwriter to get it down to the bumper sticker that we all know. So I feel okay about making some edits. And I think also if you dig into the NASA story a little bit, you find that there's been kind of a dance with failure throughout the organization's history. That many of their successes were kind of littered with failures along the way. This man you see is NASA's current administrator, Charles Bolden. He's the first African American to ever have that role, that honor. And as a young person, when he was in high school, as many of you are, he had a dream school. And his dream school was to attend the U.S. Naval Academy. And there was a big obstacle standing in his way. That obstacle was the senator from his state, Strom Thurmond, who said, "No way are you going to get an appointment to the Naval Academy." These were inhospitable times for an African-American scholar. Fortunately, this young man, when he was a young man, knew how to network. So he wrote a letter to then Vice President Lyndon Johnson, expressing his interest, his desire to become part of this future. When Lyndon Johnson became president, very interested in civil rights, and sent out some recruiters looking for promising candidates of color to come to the U.S.'s military academies, and guess whose name came up? So failure averted for him because he had the persistence, finding a way around, finding a workaround. NASA's not the first to make a motto out of failure. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard Thomas Edison's take on this. Here he's chatting with Henry Ford, fly on the wall moment that we can all imagine what they might be talking about. These were both brilliant inventors, brilliant minds who learned by trial and error, going through many, many iterations. If you go visit the museum that is now what's left of Edison's Imagination Factory, you hear about the goal of getting as many ideas out as quickly as possible so you could get the bad ones out of the way and persist with the good ones. And every 6 months have a big trick that was ready to market. But there were going to be a lot of litter along the way, ideas that wouldn't work. Fast forward to today, and our tech sector seems to be just in love with failure. This is Facebook's motto. The idea is get those bugs out quickly so that coders can fix them. Let's find out where the errors are. Googlers are all about failing fast and failing forward, putting products out where they're this kind of always in beta mode, so they're never quite perfect, always being fixed. You can start to think that perhaps failure is the best thing ever. Startups use the same kind of language. And in fact, in the development sector, we find organizations kind of making a party out of failure. This is actually an idea that came from the development sector, and I know here at ZIS, this idea has been tried. And the point is, let's take some of our things that didn't work, attempts that didn't work, bring them out in the open, talk about them in a very relaxed, informal way, maybe laugh a little bit about our own journey, and then we don't have to repeat those failures. We can learn from them and move forward. So failure can start to sound like just the best thing ever. Brilliant minds like John Seely Brown, who was the chief scientist for Xerox back in the day, and is now a person very interested in education. He likes to, in his spare time, watch surfers and skateboarders learn, because they're constantly learning new tricks by coming together as kind of a community of people interested in trying something hard, cheering each other on, but also learning from each other's mistakes and kind of challenging each other forward. He says we should just expect failure. These guys are some people just a little bit older than you high school students who have some firsthand experience with failure. If they look happy here, it's because they just won the $1 million Hult Prize this year. And they're going to be able to go ahead and put to use the idea that they had to improve the lives of children growing up in the biggest slums in the world. And the challenge for the Hult Prize, every year, former President Bill Clinton tosses out a big, wicked, gnarly challenge, and then teams form around that at the college and graduate school level. They try to come up with the sorts of solutions that are really going to make a difference. I had a chance to talk with these students right after the winning event happened, and they were still kind of floating on air, but they talked about what a long shot they were and how many failures they had to overcome on their way to success. Now, I'll share just 3 with you. The first one was they didn't know anything about the topic. The topic was, how do we improve early education, very early childhood education in the world's slums? They didn't know much about early child education except from their own experience of once having been kids. So they had to dig into the research literature, they had to talk to a lot of people, they had to go observe kids at play and in learning centers, talk with teachers, really get up to speed on this. So they got past that first potential failure by really knowing how to learn. Then they didn't know each other all that well, and they were also coming from different cultural backgrounds. This winning team is from National University in Taiwan. They're a very diverse team. There's a North American, a South American, a couple of students from Asia. They came to this team with very different cultural backgrounds and kind of personal styles. The North American describes himself as sort of brash and let's get right to it, and I'm full of ideas and listen to me. The South American said that he needed to get to know people on kind of a personal relationship level first before he could really dig in. The students from Asia had, they brought yet other perspectives. So before they could be successful as a team, they had to get to know each other and figure out, how are we going to work together? How are we really going to collaborate, be successful here? Another challenge they had to work through and overcame. And then finally, they had to actually confront true failure. The way this contest works is that it starts off with lots of teams, it gets winnowed and narrowed down, then there's a regional event, winners of the regionals, go to the finals, global finals. These students lost at the regional level. And so what happens if you're a runner-up? Do you just give up and pack it in and go home, especially when you feel like you're sitting on a good idea? What happened with these students, after the winners were announced and they weren't the winners, some audience members came up to them and said, you guys have most of a really good idea. If you would keep going with this, we think it could really be valuable to the world. We don't think you should give up. They heard that from several audience members. What was their idea? It was to bring Montessori-style education to the urban slums by helping mothers living in the slums to become kind of franchisees, to train them in Montessori-style education and help them start small businesses. So there's a whole interesting sustainability piece to this, of how would you keep this idea going. They saw enormous potential for how this might be a life changer for kids growing up in the slums, and how it would teach them some skills that would perhaps keep them out of the gangs that are prevalent in many of the slums that they were working in Latin America and India and elsewhere. And so they took the challenge, and it turns out there was a sudden death round that they didn't know about until they had lost the first time around. The sudden death round worked this way. If you could get enough people on board with your idea in social media, you got another shot, and perhaps you could go to the finals that way. So these guys took that on. They knew how to use social media, but they also knew their model, their idea, had some holes in it. It wasn't good enough yet. From losing at regionals, they said, we have time now to really fine-tune this and make it better. And so that's exactly what they did. They got a lot of feedback. They did some pilot testing. They worked with those who were going to be their partners in the slums and came up with a much better idea. So they credit their failure at regionals with coming up with a winning idea at the end. All these stories of the benefits of failure, learning from failure, failure may start to sound like just the best thing ever. You know, if we wrestle with things enough, we're going to come up with a brilliant idea. But here's the other little secret here. Failure just feels terrible, right? Anyone who's experienced something that was just very disappointing, potentially damaging to yourself or others, you don't want to have the colossal meltdown, the giant, huge, horrible failure that will get you or someone else hurt or keep you from your dreams, especially when it comes to students who are at a very formative stage in life. Students in the room, if you brought home a paper like this, would there be a big shout of celebration? Like, wow, fantastic failure. Look at you guys. Wonderful. I don't think so. Teachers, would you say, oh, I'm so happy this student failed? No. So it got me thinking about if there's so much potential in failure, in learning from failure, but school is a kind of a failure-averse place. We try to protect kids from failure. How do we take advantage of this? How do we make room for failure in the learning experience? There's one more audience I wanted to check in with, and that's parents in the room. This whole topic of failure, allowing for failure, you don't have to identify yourself, but perhaps some of you are the sorts of parents who are very good at rescuing your kids from failure. There's a term popular in the US, the helicopter parent. Don't know if that's made it to Switzerland or if you have parents like this, for the best of intentions, often parents will want to protect their kids from any sort of disappointment. You know, if I can step in and help with this, I'm going to do it. If they forgot an assignment at home, I'm going to get it to school on time for the deadline. If they forgot their coat, I'm going to bring it to them. And we do these things as parents. I'm a parent myself, so I'm completely guilty of having done this in the past. We do these things with the best of intentions to get our kids on a path to success. But guess what? There are things that they're missing if we don't let them struggle a little bit, if we don't occasionally let them go ahead and fail, pick yourselves up and figure out what are your next steps. There's a wonderful new book called How to Raise an Adult that parents might want to take a look at. And a Stanford dean talks about how she's concerned about the current generation of college kids because they're arriving in kind of an overprotected state, many of them. The first time they hit a bump, they don't get along with a roommate, or they get sort of poor feedback from a professor, they don't know how to respond because they haven't had a chance to work through that on their own yet. So how do we help kids struggle with things and yet still put them on a path to success that we want? Where's the sweet spot for failure in education? So I thought I'd let students in the room on a little bit of education ease, a little bit of education talk, and teachers are going to recognize this. This is the acronym for the zone of proximal development. Any teacher is going to be familiar with this. And this is the zone where, with the right amount of help, you can be successful. Without that help, you're really not ready to succeed yet. So what we do as educators is put the right supports in place and then start pulling them back so that kids can develop the confidence and competence to go ahead and be successful. If you ever learned to ride a bike with training wheels, you were in the zone. That's kind of what this is all about. And actually, your teachers are designing project experiences all the time that are just challenging enough, that put you right at that edge of failure, and you're just supported enough so that if you start to really struggle, you're going to get some help, but you're still going to have room to struggle. There's going to be some wobbly time there, and that's called learning. That's when the learning is happening. If it were all so easy, there really wouldn't be much learning going on. You need a little bit of that struggle. Just the right amount, not so much that it kills your spirit, but enough to make it a right-sized challenge. And when you're in that zone, there's a certain kind of assessment or feedback that's really most helpful to get you through it. And that's not a letter grade or a mark that goes in the book. When you're in the middle of that learning experience, you need a lot of feedback and time to take in that feedback, put it to use, make another draft, make another revision, learn from what's not working, get some support, learn in a different way than you tried the first time. And I think of that as assessment for learning, not assessment of learning. So if we can relax a little bit in that messy middle part of a project or when students are working long-term on something, not feel like they need grades all the time in that process. Actually, they need just the opposite. They need a little breathing room, they need some support with the struggle, and they need to be allowed to struggle. Folks well beyond education are thinking about the same thing, all kinds of sectors, but I think as we prepare students to head into this uncertain world, wherever they may go, it's worth acknowledging that failure is going to be part of the journey. And we need to help today's students be prepared for that journey, be prepared to learn from the struggles and challenges, and not let that get in the way of their dreams. Thank you very much.